My 2-year-old son and his imaginary friend. Or so we thought. It all started a few months back, when my son, out of the blue, said, "Look, it's CB." This name shocked us, because it just so happens my brother saw something or someone when he was about 2 years old, and his name was CB too. My parents just thought that CB was an imaginary friend. My brother is now 25 years old and doesn't have much memory of CB. My parents still thought of CB as my brother's imaginary friend until the day my son saw something or someone named CB. Weird thing about CB is that he is only around at our mother's house. You can ask my son, "Where's CB?" and he says, "At home." So we're guessing CB's home is at my mother's because he never mentioned CB at our home. We thought this was the only thing in person he was seeing until he started waking up at our home, screaming and looking at the ceiling, saying, "It scared me." We also started noticing him staring off, looking around, all big-eyed and terrified. Sometimes he just carried on with his businesses, and then there were the other times when whatever this is scares him so bad, he can't do anything but scream and cry. We have no idea if they're ghosts, spirits, angels, or what. All we know is whatever it is keeping him from sleeping at night. It terrifies him, and we just want to know what it could be. I hate the thought of something that's scary or terrifying presenting itself to my child. Can anyone help us, please? Michael, the imaginary friend. Michael was an imaginary friend that I had from a very young age. He must have appeared at about the age of 4, and when I began to grow up, I gradually mentioned him less and less, as my family are very strong paranormal and spirit believers. An imaginary friend was no surprise, and they accepted it. I used to talk about Michael as if he were really there, and described his dress attire to my mom as Victorian. Now in the present, I can't remember what he looked like or what he had specifically dressed in, but I remember clearly some experiences I had with him. When we lived in the house I grew up in until around the age of 7, my room had a cupboard that had shelves leading right up the top. I don't know if people reading this from a different country will know about this, but I had cuddly toys that were the tweenies. One day I was playing with Michael and I began to cry because I couldn't find one of the tweenies, Milo. I told my mom and said to her that Michael had hidden it in a place where I couldn't get it, in the cupboard on the topmost shelf. My mom opened the cupboard, and sure enough, my toy was sitting on the top shelf, which would have been impossible to get to. Once, my family were around my grandparents, and the adults were all in the kitchen, while I was in the living room. I had toys all over the floor, which included a coloring book and crayons. My mom and grandmother came into the room to find the walls had been covered with crayon scribbles. I got told off for it even though I had been quietly watching a film and I insisted it was Michael. Finally, my mother and her friend, a woman very sensitive to the paranormal world, had taken me out shopping. While paying for something, my mother placed me on the counter and my legs began swinging wildly. My mom told me to stop as it was causing a scene, but her friend quietly told her that I couldn't stop because Michael was playing with my legs and he wouldn't stop. I never had any bad experiences with Michael. I believe he was merely a playful spirit. Dangerous imaginary friend. To start my story, you need to know about my family. I have a son who is 4 years old, and unfortunately, I am a single mother. My mom is very in touch with paranormal entities, spirits, etc. I, however, have not received this trait, but I am starting to assume my son is capable of seeing such things. Now, I will just state that the following events are very full on, and that before this, I did not believe in such capabilities of something that isn't human. That is why I was so hesitant at first. Now, it was the middle of summer, and we were just having a lazy day at home. We had the television on, but pretty much on mute. Jaden, my son, was playing with some of his toys when he started talking to someone, saying things like, "Come on, Jack, you're the bad guy." I just assumed it was in association to the toys he was playing with, so I, like many others would, brushed it off. Not a week later, I was just talking to Jaden about his dream, this dream he had the night before. It was him going away with a friend. When I asked what the friend's name was, he answered Jack. But being me, I brushed it off as one of his toys. He kept mentioning this Jack person through the next few weeks, and after a while, I just snapped and asked him who Jack was. He lifted his arm up and pointed behind me. He said something that made me jump. He says, "Why don't you just ask him yourself?" This freaked me out, but I assumed it was just an imaginary friend. The next day, I had a friend over for lunch, and we were just talking when Jaden walked out. He was generally talking or playing, but it was with someone. My friend Tess asked him who he was talking to. He replied with Jack. I was asking Tess if her daughter Alicia, who is now 14, ever had an imaginary friend, and she told me that she didn't, but her sister's son had one that she thought was a spirit. From then on, I was on the edge about this Jack. A week later, Jaden was in his room yelling, so I ran upstairs, scared someone was in the house with a knife in hand. When I got to Jaden's room, there were blocks, toys, books, and clothes everywhere. Jaden was in a horrible mood. I started asking him why he made it such a mess in his room, and he just sat there in silence. So I yelled, "Clean it up now!" and walked out. Jaden then yelled, "It was Jack!" I stormed right back into his room and screamed at him, "It wasn't Jack because there is no Jack!" 2 days after the incident, I walked upstairs to put Jaden's clothes in his drawers and found him standing on top of his cupboard. His cupboard is about 1.5 meters high, so I was astounded he climbed up there. In a panic, I yelled at him, "What are you doing? Get down!" He said to me, "Jack told me to jump. I have to be nice to Jack or he will hurt me." It was that point that I realized maybe Jack wasn't so imaginary. I decided to put in a baby monitor, and if that failed, I decided I would put in a camera. I kept the monitor in the kitchen so I could hear it from a distance. I was at the dinner table when I heard the monitor start buzzing, almost static, white noise. I could hear Jaden talk, and then static would start, but every few seconds I could hear a voice. It was unclear and I couldn't understand what it was saying, but obviously Jaden could. I rushed upstairs and of course, he was playing with Jack. So I set up my camera and had the baby monitor running. I was going to find out what this was. I was in the kitchen watching Jaden play and saw blocks, toys, and books all moving by themselves. I was frozen in fear, watching in panic. Jaden stood up and said, "No, Jack, no!" Jack must have been yelling because all of a sudden, I heard a big, booming voice over the monitor yell, "I will hurt you." Out of nowhere, I heard a loud thud. This caused me to run. I sprinted up the stairs, yelling for my son. I found him crying on the floor of my bedroom. He was laying in pain in front of my cupboard. I comforted him and rushed to the car. I drove him down to the hospital, where they found he had a broken rib and sprained wrist. After he had calmed down, I asked him what happened. He just told me. Jack pushed me off your cupboard. That week, I called the priest in to cleanse the house, and Jaden seemed really different. Of course, in a good way. He seemed to be very light in a way, and he also seemed not to be afraid of the house. 3 months later, and he still hasn't mentioned Jack. I know it's hard to believe in this, but after talking to my mother, she seemed positive Jack was there, and she told me that there are demons looking to hurt people. Thank you for reading my story. Any suggestions if he returns? Or any information on what Jack was? Also, be careful if your child has imaginary friends. Make sure they check out